Why did I call it Educating the Readers? Many of you may have seen the film or read this, the play Educating Readers, about a working class woman who returns to education. It opens her eyes and mind. She falls in love with learning. It kind of affects her relationships with her husband. She's expected to be a wife, who's expected to have children, who's expected to be, a hairdresser or a working class job. And there's a couple of scenes that are really poignant in that film or that play. One of them is when she's down the pub with her friends, and they sort of start questioning, well, why do you want to be different from us? What do you see in education? And she starts to realise that education has changed her. She's become different from her friends, and that was very uncomfortable. And there's another scene which I absolutely love. She feels very different from the students. She feels that university is posh and not for types like her. Yet she's there engaging in education, and she's on the bus one day and she looks at a young lad who's a traditional student, very middle class, young student, obviously come from A levels, and she has the confidence to look down at him who's reading a book and sort of says, oh, are you familiar with the work of Forster? And he sort of says yes, and she says, are you a student? And he says yes, and she says, so am I. And that pride in her is just amazing. And I really felt that a lot of my, students on Access reflected, that character of Rita, that where they come into education, they maybe feel that education isn't for the likes of them. Maybe they didn't do well at school, didn't enjoy school. Maybe they see education as a very middle class thing, and that's not for people like them. But they've come back and they've had a go and they've learned and developed. And actually it really starts changing the people they are. And that's why I've called my research Educating the Readers. So the readers were my students who have really benefited from education, but most importantly, have really needed some motivation, some kind of bigging up, telling them they can do it, telling them that actually that, they are a proper student, they can go to university. That motivation is really important. So here are just some of the findings then, and then in just a second, I'll specifically explain how they particularly relate to teachers on Access courses. So one of the first things I looked at was social class, and I specifically asked the students about social class, whether they felt social class had any bearing on their experiences. And here's what's come on a couple of the things that came out of that. For a lot of them, social class identity was perceived as not being synonymous with academic success or affluent careers or even being proper students. A lot of them saw that proper students were posh students, younger students, A-level students who had gone to university. A lot of them were very aware of their sort of working class roots and felt that kind of didn't link well to education. And actually, statistically, you will find that working class students won't do as well as students from more affluent social class backgrounds. Now, that does not mean that working class students aren't as intelligent or as capable. There are lots of other sort of material reasons why students from lower class backgrounds don't do as well. But very often the perception is one of intelligence. So, middle class students must be more intelligent, which isn't true. Some of the students said they don't have a class because they don't work. And that was really indicative of their sense of pride and respectability. Many of the students were reliant on state benefits to help support them at that present time. And that made them feel as if they didn't have a social class, which was really sad, I felt, because if you feel part of a class, you feel some sense of social solidarity, you feel like you belong in society. Feeling that you don't have a class links with feeling like you don't belong. And for some of the students, coming back into education was about gaining that respectability. Some of them had the idea that, if the middle class were intelligent, well, if I'm not middle class, then I'm non-intelligent. And that's something that was really important to kind of reframe for those students. This is a quote from one of the students. They said, I've applied to 2 proper unis and also to do a foundation degree, which is offered here at the college. It would be safer to stay here because I know the college and there will be more people like me on the foundation degree here. But I've also applied for a bachelor's degree with honours, so I need to decide whether to take a big step and go somewhere different, but risk being out of place and not coping with a very different approach. And here you can kind of see the perspective of different degrees and different universities were very much class-based, and their feeling of whether they would fit into that particular place impacted upon their choice of degree. They didn't see that actually qualifying with their access diploma and meeting the requirements of the university's entry requirements, it meant that they were capable and they would be fitting into that uni, but they felt very much, would I belong? And that made a big difference on in terms of their applications. And there was also a strong sense of staying true to their class roots. And when I asked about, well, when you get your degree and you become that social worker or that counsellor or that teacher or whatever that job was going to be, would that mean they change classes? And one of the reasons I asked that was because the widening participation approach and the government rhetoric regarding upward social mobility very much considers, one route out of, poverty is to rise up through the class ranks. One vehicle to do that is to get an education, go to university, get a graduate job, and almost rise up to another social class. But the students didn't want that. They were happy being working class. They were proud of their class roots. They valued their hard work and commitment and their strong links to their families. And so their perspective was very much, yes, they wanted those graduate jobs, but they weren't interested in becoming middle class or upper class or changing their class at all. So their kind of perceptions were quite different to government assumptions regarding upward social mobility. So they saw upward social mobility as moving away from their working class roots, and actually that ignored the value that they had, the qualities they had, such as being hardworking and creative. Some of the students mentioned, there was always ways of making money, making ends meet, and then that's a skill to have. Being able to juggle, children and work and homework and come into class and meeting new people was real skills that they had developed. They were resilient, but they didn't kind of see those as being skills, unfortunately. So social class and their idea of their place in society really influenced the ideas about which university would be right for them, which was sad because in some ways it limited what types of university that they could have gone to. One of the students said, I hope there are other mature students like me that I can connect with so we can help each other, or else I will have to learn to talk posh and try and make friends that way. And she saw that as a sort of joke. But actually what she was saying was, in order to fit in, would she have to talk posh or be different, become different? She didn't see that she was perfect as she was, and she had the right and the ability to go to university. So identity management then, so for a number of students, coming to education was a way of changing their identity. So returning to education was a vindication of some stigmatized identities. And this really related to a lot of students who were out of work. Some of the students who had been through rehabilitation for drug and alcohol, and some of the students who were claiming benefits, and specifically some of the single parents who were claiming benefits. One of the students who was a mum raising children on her own said in regards to claiming benefits that she had to claim in order to kind of survive, this is how they see me, just another lazy benefit mum. I'm not a person to them. I'm a drain, another drain on the system, and they don't care about how I feel or how inhuman it makes me feel having to claim them. Then justify why I need to claim over and over again whenever they decide to do a check. It's humiliating and I want to get out of this situation. This young lady was lovely, really intelligent, so committed to her course, a great mum, really hardworking, just had to claim benefits for this period of time, but she felt so stigmatized by that and just hated the benefit system, which made her feel that way. And she felt that going to university would change that label. She wanted to be a graduate. She wanted to be a midwife, actually. She wanted to be so-and-so's mum, who was the graduate, who was the midwife, rather than what she perceived to be, this person who was a lazy benefit mum. And it was very much that rhetoric that we see in the media, unfortunately, which is really untrue. And instantly her Play-Doh model that she made to depict her experience on access was very much framed around, access was a way of giving herself some respect. She was proud to say that she'd passed her diploma. It changed that label that she perceived to have. And this Play-Doh model, it almost makes me feel tearful looking at it. She chose the black to show the dehumanizing, the stripping of any color or any creativity or any personality that she had. And she said she felt it was like a stab in the eye, that she was punished for having to claim benefits. But coming to education was going to change that feeling, that label that she felt she had. A lot of the students who were single parents on benefits used something called othering as a tool for impression management. So they would talk about how they didn't want to be seen like those other lazy benefit type mums. They had this impression that there were mums or parents out there who were lazy and claiming benefits, but they weren't like it. Although actually by doing that, they were perpetuating those stereotypes that were unfair and untrue. So they'd even kind of absorbed and believed some of these stereotypes that people claim benefits because, they're lazy or work shy. Those kind of phrases that you hear in some of the right-wing outlets, media outlets, which were really unfair. But just goes to show the power of the media and how this can impact people. But again, they saw education as a way of changing that, of changing their lives around and doing something to help themselves. So upward social mobility then was agentic. So the government kind of has this rhetoric that individuals can help themselves if they take the steps to work hard and do this. And this kind of rhetoric of broken Britain, we have in our media, but it ignores the structural barriers. It's really hard work to help yourself. It's hard work to juggle childcare, to find out about the access course, to have the confidence to come and do it, to write your essays, to get that feedback and maybe not pass an assignment, but come back and do it again, to pay for your UCAS application, to gamble that time where you could be working, but you're doing your essays. Or maybe you could have been spending more time with your kids, but you're studying. Those were structural barriers which are ignored when the government talks of social mobility through education. And it's important for the government to realise that if you want to improve, people's circumstances, improve the gap between the rich and poor by getting adults to come to education to help themselves, they really need to realise that there are those barriers, and those barriers need to be supported and helped in order for students to be able to be successful and come back to education. One of the comments from the students was that access has given me a bit of status because it feels more acceptable to be out of work if I am a student who's off to university. It's like I am no longer seen as lazy and I'm making something of myself. I'm going to qualify and get a career which helps people and contributes to society. This student was wanting to be a nurse. When she qualifies as a nurse, she's going to be the same person, but the label is different, isn't it? The feeling of self-respectability is different. And this is what a lot of the students wanted. Intersectionality then was another theme that I looked into, and this is where we realise that gender and ethnicity and class all intersect. So it's very hard to separate one from the other. And one of the questions I asked was, has ethnicity in any way impacted on your experiences during the year? And it was interesting because one of the students who was identified as Black, she was a girl who was from a Somali background. She was born in Somalia, came to Britain when she was 3, and was now doing an access course to become a midwife. Her reaction, to that sort of question was talking about the other students and how, yes, she always, experienced racism, in different institutions in school when she was younger, in the workplace. But she said, there wasn't any racism on the access course. The students were nice to me. They were nice to me. And, that kind of made me think, as a white woman, I'd never consider, if I was going to go on an access course, or, when I've gone into a new job or a new course, I never for once think about the colour of my skin and whether or not people would be nice to me because of that. And that really reiterated that for some students, their ethnicity is something that's a big issue. The way that other people treat them is a bigger issue than for others. One of the white students said, I don't really have an ethnicity. And I think this really reiterates this idea of white privilege. You know, she didn't even consider having an ethnicity. To her, ethnicity meant being not white. And I think that goes to show how much we need to change that curriculum. We need to educate people, understand what white privilege is, and we need to teach anti-racism, because for one person, they didn't even think about ethnicity, but for another person, you know, their thoughts as they entered the course on the first day was going to be, you know, does the colour of my skin impact upon my education? That's a really important consideration. When discussing cultural backgrounds, interestingly, white students tend to discuss their social class backgrounds, whereas Black students were specific about their ethnic culture. So ethnicity and culture meant different things to different students. And one of the students, who was Black African, said, my white teacher asked me about some case studies she was using, and it was nice that she actually asked. She asked me to help her improve her lessons. It showed she understood that for Black people like me, we rarely see Black voices or Black history included in textbooks and lessons. It meant a lot. It's how it should be. So what she was saying here was that her white teacher was asking her advice. How can I make sure that my lessons are inclusive? Is this the best phrases to use? You know, what do you think? And that was nice for that student to feel that she was equal in regards to, you know, the student was teaching the teacher something. And we need to remember that although, you know, our kids in schools today, you know, have an agenda of inclusivity and Black history being, you know, increasingly not there, we're not there yet, but it's increasingly improving in regards to teaching. But our students may have been, you know, in education in the 60s, 70s, 80s. You know, in the 80s, you know, there was lots of, well, in the 70s and 80s, there were massive issues in regards to, you know, clashes and racism, you know, as there still is today. But there certainly was, you know, a very bad, you know, experience for Black and ethnic minority students in lessons in the 60s and 70s. So coming back into education, you know, their perceptions of what they're going to receive would be, you know, entrenched in their experiences back when they were younger. Another example was student loans. You know, just out of interest, I wonder how many of you realise that a lot of Muslim students can't take out a student loan. And that's because of their religion and their culture. But there are halal loans that are available. I didn't know this until about 3 years ago as a teacher, until someone pointed it out to me, and then I was horrified to realise how many of my students I was teaching, you know, about student loans and student finance, but actually leaving them out without realising. And that's a barrier, isn't it, to higher education for a number of students. So here are just some of the few of the Play-Doh models that some of the students did to depict their time on the Access course. The one at the top left was a lady in her 50s, and she said that Access had given her the wings to fly. She called herself an old bird. This old bird is going to fly. Although the wings were clipped slightly because her options of university were limited geographically, because she had a mortgage and she had grandchildren that she regularly cared for. The bottom left one was lovely. That was a love of psychology. This person had never really heard of psychology and never studied it before. Thought studied subjects like that were academic and way above her, but fell in love with it and actually changed her options and actually went to do a psychology degree, which was a complete turnaround from the person she was when she entered the door back in September before. Okay then, so how does this relate to you guys as practitioners? So here's just some takeaways really from my research in regards to, you know, how you can learn from this. So one of the things that come out of the research was pastoral care, and I'm sure it's no surprise to you to hear that the emotional support from staff, that phone call or email to check if they're okay, if they've missed a lesson or appeared not themselves, was pivotal. And actually one of the students said it made a difference. She'd given up, but her tutor had phoned her and said, come on, let's have a look at deadlines. Can I help you manage your workload? Let's put it in perspective, you know, come back. And that made the difference. And she's now gone to university. Communities of practice were important. encouraging peer support, maybe encouraging students to get WhatsApp groups so they can chat with each other. Maybe you use Teams as a virtual learning environment, getting them to share tips, links, extra videos from YouTube to help their learning. One thing that was important was the students realizing that all of them felt imposter syndrome. You know, all of the students felt that they were the thick one and everyone else knew what they were doing. And once they realized that they all felt like that, having that shared identity really helped them help each other, helping them realize that that one at the beginning that was quite vocal and they thought he or she knew what they were doing actually was the most unconfident and was really helpful to them kind of bonding with each other and supporting each other. Timetabling, and I'm sure you'll all nod in agreement with this. Pastoral support often falls in the teacher's lunchtime when they're quickly nipping to get their coffee and they see the student in the hallway, or the student pops into the staff room during that only 30 minutes that week that they have for planning time, and tutors need this time recognised. So senior leadership staff need to really understand the importance of timetabling. And, you know, the way to kind of communicate that maybe to management and senior leadership is that pastoral support is essential for retention and for retention numbers. So, you know, if it is retention, that's their key objective. And for most teachers, it is pastoral support and keeping them on the right track because they want them to succeed. But that needs to be recognised because staff do need that time to do that. And knowing your students as well, to adapt to their needs. So things like, you know, do your students, worship Ramadan, witness Ramadan? Are they fasting? In which case, could you change the date of the presentation to be outside of that so they're not hungry and feeling faint? Is a student always 5 minutes late because they've got 3 kids to drop off at 2 different schools and then they've got to run up the hill, to college or whatever? Do they need to be told they're late, or can you just accept them with a smile, because that makes a real difference as well? And being kind, remembering their past experience of teachers might be negative. You might get students at the beginning of the year which might come across as rude or a bit abrupt to you. Is that because they're expecting you to be rude to them or tell them off or call them out, which of course we don't as access teachers. But their past experiences really affect their perception of you as teachers. University choices, are they limiting themselves due to limiting their beliefs? Ask them why they're applying to universities, ask them why they're not applying to universities. And it could just be that they think that type of university wouldn't be for them. Ask them why. A lot of universities have widening participation projects. So for example, Bristol University, where I teach, has an Access to Bristol scheme, which is aimed at non-traditional students to get them coming to university before the course starts. And Bristol, for example, would guarantee them an offer of an interview if they come and do their Access scheme. And that can be a way of them stepping in and seeing what it's like and realising that actually they may find that Bristol University is the best, or whichever university is the best for them. And also wider curriculum to educate, empower and excite them. So for example, I hosted something called Social Science Cinema. I did it on the virtual learning platform. Every week or so, I'd post a link to a film or a documentary that they could watch, which helped them learn about wider issues. So for example, Made in Dagenham is a great film about gender and equal pay. Pride is a great one about the media and gay rights. Daniel Blake is a great one for social class. You may have access through your college login to sites such as ClipView, which means that students can access it for free. Not all students have linked Netflix or Prime or whatever, so do try and get links that everyone can watch. But be a role model, get them looking at wider political issues, widening their social knowledge. That helps their kind of enthusiasm, it helps their confidence, gives them things to talk about in their university interview as well. So that wider curriculum empowers them, excites them, gets them excited about learning, and gets them more confident as well. Think about case study examples and theories that you use. Do they represent different genders, ethnicities, abilities, for example? So for example, in science, images of Stephen Hawking. Yes, he has a disability, but he's an amazing scientist, and look what he did. So, you know, just because he had disability, it didn't stop him and his, you know, very intelligent self doing lots of great work. You know, can you think about other examples other than just white examples? Can you bring in Black history? Here's an example of a case study task that I did for crime and deviance for my sociology students. Previously, I realized actually most of my examples were white, and I had to really reflect upon what I was teaching. And so I changed one of my tasks to this task, getting them to research the Notting Hill race riots, and then getting them to question the difference between a riot and a protest. And did that change their view of the Notting Hill events after they'd researched it? Here's an example in psychology where students are looking at mental health. Can you look at the difference between gender and social class and ethnicity? Can you link them together? You know, if people from lower social class backgrounds are more susceptible to certain mental illnesses, and certain ethnic backgrounds or certain, you know, agendas are more susceptible, what if you are from a particular class and ethnicity and gender? How is that a double burden? How does that intersect? So getting them to look at wider issues really, you know, kind of helps them to see different issues around different examples such as mental health. So your PowerPoints use images which are inclusive of gender, ability, age, ethnicity, etc., etc. Because if they can't see themselves reflected in the careers they want to progress into, they may not feel they'll make it. And I remember when I was 17, loving sociology, but all the theorists were men. You know, could a woman be a sociologist? I didn't think so, and I didn't go to university at 18 because I didn't think that I could do that sort of thing, and I didn't think that I could go anywhere with sociology because I didn't realise the types of careers that were available in sociology. Hence why I went back as a mature student. And ask yourself, will all my students feel they are represented? Do they feel inspired through the examples and ideas that I present to them? So I just want to finish off then with a theorist that I absolutely love, a lady called Bell Hooks. If you don't know Bell Hooks, I have spelt her name correctly. I have used a small b. There's a reason for that. And if you don't know Bell Hooks, I'll challenge you to look her up and see why she doesn't use a capital B for her name. I just want to give you two quotes. Oh, my system's got a bit slow. I think I've crashed. Here we go. So the first quote then is, as a classroom community, our capacity to generate excitement is deeply affected by our interest in one another, in hearing one another's voices and recognizing one another's presence. And I think this really reiterates how, you know, we're not just a teacher giving our knowledge to our students. We're not sages filling up empty vessels. Actually, our students have a vast, you know, experience and lots of skills to share, and working together and drawing upon that, encouraging them, you know, treating everybody equal and getting their enthusiasm can really, really enhance their learning environment. And the classroom remains the most radical space of possibility in the academy. Absolutely. I'd love to one day for the next one Prime Minister to be an access student. Wouldn't an access student make the best Prime Minister? I think we'd all agree they would really know their stuff and understand the needs of society. But also as a challenge to you, you know, what are your next possibilities? You know, you might love teaching. What are you going to do next to push yourself to learn more? We'll never stop learning. You know, do you have a degree? Have you thought about doing a master's degree? Have you thought about doing a doctorate? You know, I'm doing a doctorate in education. I'm hopefully hoping to submit my research thesis in March. But I came from a mature student background. I was once a single mum who thought, what have I got to lose by applying to university? I didn't think I'd make it. I didn't think I'd fit in, but I took each step as I could, and thoroughly enjoying doing research and, you know, hopefully bringing the voices of my access students into the academic field. I wanted to share with you something that I always hold dear to me. This was something that one of the students gave me during my first few years of teaching, and it was a thank you card they made. And they told me that my passion is infectious and it helped them to learn. And it's something that I really want to encourage. And one of the things that a number of the students said in my research, it was the passion and enthusiasm of the teachers that got them excited about learning, which was so different to when they was at school themselves. So yeah, I'm on Twitter. If you want to follow me, I share lots of stuff regarding sociology and teaching resources and stuff about my research. And if you're interested in hearing about my background, how I went from a mature student to actually becoming a researcher at Bristol Uni, then there's a link there to my blog that I wrote about my background as well.